After that introduction at 9 o'clock in the morning, can you imagine actually spending 6 months in the middle of COVID writing a book with Stephen? That was an interesting. After we were equals writing the book, and all of a sudden, yes, I become his boss. So, welcome everyone. Appreciate you making the time to come and spend with Jacob and myself. Jacob Holtgrew is the head of digital at TIA. I'll allow him to introduce himself a little bit further. But I'm Chris Hummel. I run the B2B practice at Horizon Media, the largest independent media agency in the world. And I'm actually a 3-time client of Horizon's as a former CMO in other lives. But as Stephen aptly said, Jacob, we're here to talk about data, AI, and to go completely off script. But let's talk first about, tell me a little about the importance of data in what you do.
Yeah, so I think for us, so first of all, welcome. Thank you everybody for joining us today. I appreciate just a great conversation that we're going to have here. So data for us, so to start with, so my role as digital marketing, overseeing digital marketing for TIA, obviously data is at the core of that. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. We are going to go off script and talk a bit more in the media strategy component around connected media strategy, the value of paid, owned, and earned. But to start with, it all starts with data. You really have to have that core data spine to be successful in everything you do. If you don't get it set up correctly, if you don't have the right components, you don't have the right connections from the beginning, it will not be successful, and you will spend more time down the road fixing things, going back and doing things. But it is core in how we make decisions today. It's core in how we're going to make decisions in the future. And what's really interesting about data, and I know it goes without saying, is if you don't start it today, you're not going to be successful in the future because it takes time to build. And so then the conversations, once you have it built, the conversations go from tactical conversations to more strategic conversations and making decisions on the data and how you're using it in everyday campaigns, in business, those sorts of things.
So it's interesting because that kind of conversation goes on quite a bit, whereas historically in media, you would have scale from the volume, right? The more you would buy, the more kind of freebies you would get, as Stephen calls them, the free t-shirts that would come along with it. But nowadays, the scale is actually coming from things like data, technology, content, and other places. So you mentioned connected media. What is a connected media strategy?
Yeah, and a point like on that, especially in our space in B2B, is like the data is core to that. And a lot of people, there's a lot of misconception around what B2B marketing is. You are still marketing to an individual and still making decisions based on that data. So it's even more increasingly important in that space as well. But to answer your question, so connected media, it's not a new concept. I think it's come back into light a little bit about how AI is impacting it and how it's increasing the rate in how we do marketing and campaigns and those sorts of things. But at its core, and this is my belief, you may disagree with this, is connected media really is just an integrated marketing approach. And it brings together paid, owned, earned, and shared. I know some people don't believe that shared is a category, but we do. Really operate in an ecosystem that uses data at its core. So it shares content, it shares creative, it shares different components across the entire ecosystem, and allows you to real-time optimize, make decisions, those sorts of things. At TIA, it's called the brain. So we use it to make decisions on how we go to market from a campaign perspective. And it starts at the top through the traditional brand media all the way down to demand and performance as well.
You know, it's interesting because you have a challenge that a number of people in the audience here have as well. When we first sort of started working together, you were primarily marketing to consumers.
Yes.
And then when we came on, you started marketing more to B2B.
Yeah.
And now you're back in we actually have to market to both because of the way your sort of business works. So when you think about all those touch points and all those channels, paid, earned, owned, shared, how do you bring them together? How do you integrate them? And then by orchestrating them, what impact does that have?
Yeah, I think, so to start with, the B2B to B2C is a really interesting conversation especially in our space, because oftentimes the decision maker who's the B2B is also a client, B2C. And so what we have done in the brain is there is decision points that we make that dictate who that person is and then what they get as a result. So there's a lot of conversation that we have around that. But from like an overall, like I'll just break it down in its simplest form, is like you can't get away from like marketing. We were talking about marketing 101 earlier, is you have a campaign, you need audiences, you need KPIs, you need content, you need creative, and it really starts with that. And I think in some places, brief is an interesting term, like an intake. Like you need, I'm seeing smiles, so it seems like a hot topic at a lot of places. So you need some sort of like documentation that everybody works off of. That there is one core place that shows what we're trying to do, that is the North Star. From there, you're going to have different teams, which makes it difficult of like, you're going to have a content team go create content, you're going to have an automation team go create emails, you're going to have a media team go create media strategy, but how do you bring those pieces together? And it goes back to what we were starting with, is it's the data. It starts with that shared data, those data points, shared definitions, those sorts of things, and how we want to activate. A lot of that is through tech. Last year we spent a lot of time on technology. How do you have connected ecosystems? How do you set up your MarTech stack so they're talking to each other, that it's sharing data here, pushing data there, those sorts of things. And then there's also like the traditional softer side of like, how do you be successful with it? And that's like the cadence of meetings, and how do you get teams into room, and how do you whiteboard, and how do you get conversation around like, we're doing this versus that, those sorts of things. And then you let it run. Like you have to let it run. And that's where AI has been really interesting, is it spits out massive amount of information that took days, weeks for teams to do for a long time. And now it's how do you use that and in those conversations make decisions off of that and real-time optimize. And what it has done, to answer your question, is it's forced the conversation around investment, which is always a key piece of marketing. It's like, now you have these paid, owned, earned channels and shared channels, and where do you need to actually spend money to get clients? You need to actually spend money to cultivate clients. And oftentimes, at least for us, the answer is no. So how do we activate those own channels and really dictate how they show up there versus paying for new clients, using our own channels to nurture and cultivate and then drive business?
Yeah, you joked about the brief in the beginning. One of the use cases of AI we see in a lot of clients is actually to create the brief, which is a funny story because we as the agency are going to them to ask them for their experience and input, and they're going to a data set to actually collate and organize all that. So it's kind of a, how do you then get that in?
So we have an agent that does that, or it's in development, which a lot of people do. And our belief is, we want to take some of the normal, like briefing is just part of business. We have to do that to make sure we're all working together. But if we can take that off a person and then we spend the resources on strategic conversations and making decisions versus like inputting data into the brief. So we've uploaded all our previous briefs, all the results and all those sorts of things. And it starts with a simple just interface of questions, and it gets to a point where it kicks out. That's the end goal. We're not quite there yet, but that's the end goal.
Yeah, I know I'm supposed to be interviewing you, but I'll also share from our own side, one of the things we're doing is we're using Agent Space from Google, and it's behind the firewall for us. So what we do is we create a unique LLM for every client. So actually, we take not only the brief that they give us, but we take the data set that we've accumulated in-house, so to speak, to sort of build our own knowledge about that. But I want to come back to one more thing in this connected media and the data. You talked about content. You mentioned content a few times. And content is this funny thing that's been around for, 400 years, right? And it's, content has been a long time. What's the role of content in all this now?
I mean, I think it's almost, dare I say, as important as the data. It's probably not as important, but it's close. If you don't have the right content, and I think a lot of firms, us included in other places I've worked, is you either have too much content, you don't have enough content, you don't have the right content. Depending on what sales team you talk to, you need this type of content. You have this sort of cohort of individuals that like to consume content this way, but it's core in this connected media strategy, because you have to be able to deliver content and I know it's cliche to say, but you have to be able to deliver content to the right person at the right time. And if you're not doing that, then it really doesn't make sense to do that. So you have to spend the time to build the deep institutional type of knowledge, those long white papers that some people need. You need the chunked out content that sits here. You need the digital content. You need the traditional content. But you need all those sorts of things for this engine to run in the background and to be able to spit out the different experiences that your clients. So it's vastly important.
Yeah, so whether data is more important or less, I think what you're saying is they both go together, right?
Exactly.
Is the data has to drive how you
Yeah.
use the content. So you've painted this great picture, you've got the brain in the background, now you've got all these multiple engagement channels, you're touching the right customer at the right time. Sounds like kind of, like, why aren't we all doing this? Like,
Yeah.
what are the challenges?
It's hard.
Okay, so why is it hard?
At least for and I don't think it's immune to just us. I think there's one is I'll start at the bottom. Is like, I think there's just a lot of technology debt that we've had to work through. We onboard a lot of platforms that didn't work, that did work somehow, weren't set up correctly. So spending the time and going back and setting it up correctly so there's connectivity. That's a real full-time job that takes a lot of focus from not only marketing team, but tech teams, data teams, to make sure that data spine and those technology platforms speak to each other. And if you, again, like I said, if you don't get that right, then you're kind of fish out of water in that place. So that's one of the biggest hurdles to overcome. The second is content. Do you have the right team set up to produce the content and the right types of content? So we spend a lot of time, I'll just use an example, is like we have a younger generation cohort that consumes content very differently. So do we have the right agencies, partners, internal people that's creating content that's specific for them and how they consume? So content's the second piece. And third is just making sure that people are brought along. This is the softer side of it, is there's a lot, at least in our space, there's a lot of decision makers or people that perceive they're decision makers. So how do you make sure that they're brought along and able to participate in the conversation, that they feel heard? But then at the end of the day, when we start to make decisions, part of the engine and the brain and the success on it is just to get it running. Because once you get it running, then you get this vast amounts of data to make decisions off of. And if you have it set up right from the core, then you can move from there.
So you made a reference earlier of not everybody believes in shared media or that it's a separate category or whatever. We could have that debate. But I'm going to turn it a little differently. Who at TIA owned media?
It's shared. This is not in the script. Where are we going with this?
Curveball.
It's shared. So so the social team sits on my team. So how we produce content and we show up from an owned social perspective. We also, the blurred line between owned and shared of like our individual associates that participate on social media, my team runs that. Now the PR comms team, like the traditional comms teams, that sits separately on a comms team, but there's an intersection point that works very closely together. And so how we produce content from that, the comms, the PR team, and then the content teams, it's kind of a shared resource. We have a couple different basically cohorts that make decisions on what content gets created, and from there it's a decision on this goes on email and this goes on social, and my team participates in that as well.
So the reason I set that up is because as we now come back to, we've talked a little bit about the data, the importance of data, right? Where content is kind of the connective tissue between a lot of those things, and then the connected media, trying to use all the pieces. So one practical example, one might argue, is AI search, which has been one of the topics that's obviously come up here quite a bit. But there isn't that traditional like owner of AI search. So how do you guys handle that? How do you think about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a big topic for us, as it is for many people, and I think there's a lot of companies and teams that are trying to figure it out, including ourselves. So you have the traditional SEO search teams that are going to continue to exist because a lot of that is optimizing content, getting clicks, and then converting on site. Like that's not going to go away. AI is changing that, obviously, like that's known. But then there's this piece from an AI search is people aren't actually coming to your site. So they are searching for how do I roll over my 401k, those sorts of things. They're consuming the information on the search engine, and then they're not actually clicking through to your site. So you're losing that traffic.
Zero click. Yeah.
Zero click. So how do we capitalize on that? So the way we've approached it is we're going to continue to do the traditional SEO. And I will say, like, my opinion is I don't think some of the search engines have it figured out how they're going to monetize some of this stuff. And so you kind of see a splattering of different techniques that they're trying with this. I think some of that's going to dictate how it shows up in the future. But from its core, so we have the traditional SEO, but then we spend a lot of time on content. And the reason why we do that is we are trying to get, as part of those references, part of cited as part of the AI tools when they spit out the information. And when you get that traffic, which is much lower, it's a highly qualified traffic. Is you get the search query of what they came through on, they come to your site, you know what they come through, and you're able to personalize on top of that. So that's how we're thinking about it and approaching it. But I'm curious what else you guys are seeing.
Yeah, we're seeing part of the challenge is actually, and I was listening to it in the breakfast room this morning. As you start to get good at AI search, it doesn't necessarily mean that the quantity of inquiries is going up, but usually means the quality because it becomes more binary.
Right.
We all wanted to be first page on our SERP, and we all wanted to get that because that meant we were one of the top 10. Right. Kind of now we need to be part of the answer, not part of an answer. So let me just turn to the crowd a little bit here, to the audience. How many of you think that AI search, whether you call it AEO, AIO, GEO, whatever, how many of you think it's a top 10 challenge for marketing?
A lot.
How many would say it's a top 5 challenge? Top 3? Anybody think it's the biggest number 1 challenge? Okay. So we have a couple of pioneers in the room here. Yeah, it is more and more. We have one client that runs their business, 95% of their business is based on phone calls. And I was just talking to the head of sales operations recently, and he said they've had a 25% drop in call volume.
That's wild.
And you would think that means, oh my God, their business is dead because they do millions of phone calls a year. So you drop 25%, that's over 500,000 calls.
Right.
He said, no, our business is up double digits. It's because they've now found other ways of getting the inquiries. So actually, the amount of inquiries is dropping, but the quality is going up, and so their business is actually, and people are starting to engage in other channels like SMS and other things like that.
I have another question.
No, shoot.
So how are they displaying that like on a KPI? Like, so we all have KPIs that we have to deliver, and oftentimes one is like traffic to the site. And that's showing up red for everybody because traffic is down. Obviously, there's an explanation, but when you see the red, that's...
So we have so the client I'm talking about, actually, they were struggling with exactly that point. They were watching what was their primary metric, call volume, go down, but their business was not feeling it. And they were waiting for the shoe to drop. They were waiting for, oh my God, this is just a delayed reaction, right? Rather than a day-to-day reaction. But they kept seeing the business go up, and so they kept hunting what's the right KPI. Right. And what they ended up stumbling over was the rise of SMS. The rise of text. So as they started to look at other factors, they saw that the SMS volume between the sales reps and their clients had exploded like 100 times. And so they were starting to find, so they started to go, okay, we need to look at inquiries, not phone calls. We need to look at how the interactions are happening. We have another client that's going through that exact problem right now, is they're still, I don't want to say fixated, but they're focused on the call volume, and yet they're watching it drop, and they're seeing their business actually take a bit of a hit, and so they're looking for other ways. And so we're trying to get in that. But Eric, I'm going to give you the question since you're now interviewing me. Thank you. So this is a lot to digest, right? And obviously there's a lot of moving pieces going on here. any recommendations in terms of best practices, immediate actions,
Yeah.
what we would call kind of micro transformations that the audience can use?
Yeah, I think for us, like when we started this conversation a year and a half ago, for us, it was really, we wanted to get quick wins. We wanted to start small. We wanted to get something out the door. And I can't stress enough is like we spent the time, if you have the luxury of time to building the data spine and building the foundation of how the tech talks to each other and the data speaks to each other, spend the time doing that. That is where we have been successful. Is it took us a long time to get to that point. It took us 2 years to get to that point, but that's where we've started to reap the benefits. So I think if you can find things to start small with is probably the most important. I think leveraging the content you have, but finding the other content that your clients are consuming is a. Why is there a picture of a polar bear?
I don't know. We're having an exciting conversation with the screen here, but
Sorry, you guys don't see this. There's like a picture of a polar bear that just showed up on our screen. It's distracting. So I think it's like those small things and finding those quick wins. And I'll go back to what I said earlier: is you have to bring people along. Like everybody, AI is very prevalent in this room. People are using it. People are using it at all levels of a company. How do you leverage that and bring them along and make it real for them so it's in practice and not just theory, and then start to make the decisions off it, I think is the most important part.
okay, so just to sort of finish up with our questions at least, let's circle it back to AI.
Yeah.
Everybody is looking at, am I building agents? You were talking about building agents.
Yeah.
Do I use generative AI? Are there any specifics you can offer in terms of wins that you've had using AI in across marketing?
Yeah, I'll start at the bottom. Is like my team was an early adopter, and it started really with our content teams. The social team, as many of you use it, they use it for ideate. We don't post just AI content, but they use it for ideation, for creation. We use it for creative. And that's a really great, but if you're not using it there, I highly encourage it. That was an easy first step. The teams are early adopters, and it's improved. Like we've done all these studies and tests on how it's improved the effectiveness of our own social and paid social from there. That's a great use case that I encourage people to start with. We are exploring several different agents, the briefing being one of them. There's another really interesting one that we're starting to feed it research, and we're using it to help us in our insights and research, because we spend a lot of time sending out this traditional surveys and waiting for it to come back and then analyzing it. Is if we can syndicate some of that stuff and really use it to kick out insights that are useful. So we're early testing in that one, but I think content's a really easy first lift for people to use it for. We use it for some data analysis. I think there's a lot more that we have to get the tires with there, but that's kind of where we've started.
Even if it's not 100% of the process, at least it can speed up kind of the production cycle. So I'll share one from our own business, which is kind of an obvious one, but it's not necessarily the marketing specific one, which is to use AI as a thought partner. Where, like this past week, we had what we call vision sessions where we were doing planning of our own business, right, with my bosses, Bob Lord and Bill Koenigsberg. And I went in and actually typed, imagine you are Bill Koenigsberg and Bob Lord. How would you react to this presentation? Does it answer your questions? What would be the issues? And it's amazing because it actually was able to sort of speed up my process of, instead of role playing and sitting on the other side and kind of going, all right, what would they do? It actually helped me role play. And so it saved me quite a bit of time in sort of doing that. So that idea of a thought part, now we have something that's behind the firewall, so I can do things like that, right? If I was sort of using ChatGPT anonymously, that might be a little bit of a different issue. I don't know if we have any burning questions from the audience. I know they didn't set up microphones, but if anybody has any, or they do actually, does anybody have any questions for Jacob? So articulate. And it's there's the polar bear again. So please.
This actually has nothing to do with AI, but more about how you are leveraging your team, especially cross-generationally, to think about your content strategy. Like, are you leveraging the insights that the younger team members might have on how to engage and that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, it comes from a good testing strategy. Is so we put stuff in market, and then we'll test it against different cohorts or personas that we have, but we use them across the board. So if we're creating content for a cohort that's a younger generation that we see is performing well, we'll actually put it in a journey or an experience that's a different cohort and see if it performs there as well. So there's a lot of testing, but it starts with, again, having the data spine and then having a testing strategy on top of that. But we definitely use it across.
Please.
You had mentioned, if I understand correctly, you had mentioned 24 months, 2 years to get your data spine. A lot of organizations, ELTs don't have that patient. In hindsight, how could you have got that to a third of the time? What best practices do you now see?
That's a great question. I don't know if I have a good answer to it. A lot of it is, in our experience, was tied up with digging into the tech debt that we had, digging into the existing data that we had, and starting to figure out what was usable and what was not. And so there was a lot of analysis that was, and we probably could have done more best practices in there, but we spent the time to go through every single piece to make sure that it was, that we either wanted it or we didn't want it. And then we rebuilt from there. It takes time. I don't know if you can cut it down by a third. Have you experienced like where you...
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
The analysis and then kind of the cross-functional collaboration, you generate more questions.
Yeah.
I think we've just seen a quantum leap in basically using AI to do the analysis for you.
Yep.
To me, that's the fastest path to get to the risk officer or the CISO or the other questions to then make some decisions.
So that I agree with you on that. When we started this 2 years ago, AI wasn't as prevalent as what it is today. That's a really good point, though. Like if I started this today, I would probably be using that quite a bit more to make those decisions and serve up the information that's relevant to the risk officer, the business, like those sorts of pieces. So I agree with you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I just add, I know a lot of the businesses here are actually regulated in some ways, right? Or they have obviously data privacy. But one of the things we made for our own business, we made a very strategic decision, which I don't know whether it saved us any time, but we think it's going to save us time going forward, which is, one, we didn't focus on how we do our job. I mean, we didn't focus on the administration of our job. We focused on how it actually, what can we do better with AI and with data in particular for our customers. And that was a big shift because so many people are worried about like, how do I do my job? And I want to get productivity out of that. The second, which was at the time, it looked like a risky decision, although we think it's a fantastic decision now, is we decided to go with an open architecture. Meaning you can go back and you can debate waterfall and agile, and you can debate closed architecture, in-house, outsourced, whatever. We made the decision that we were going to build this based on an open system, and it's one of the reasons we partnered with Google in our data areas, because the things are moving so fast. Like we talked about AI search, Reddit used to be the most popular, and I say used to, like what, weeks ago, used to be the most popular sort of place that people wanted to go advertise because they were seeing uplift in their AI search results. But as soon as people started to sort of find that hack, the hack got closed, right? Other people would use it. The rules on advertising in Reddit kind of changed, and so you had to find another place to do it. And we recognized, and I think it was, I'll give Bill Koenigsberg all the credit in the world, that we weren't going to be able to know everything. And so if we went 24 months in advance or forward and then we found we were lost, what were we going to do? Start all over again? Yeah. That's really where the time suck comes.
Right.
So we made that decision, and we'll see how it pans out.
Yeah, I mean, you made a really good point. I think we're all dealing with decisions, technology, data that existed before we even started projects, before you started in your job, those sorts of things. So I think to your point, it's like navigating that is vastly important, and the use of AI to help with that, I think is important as part of that as well.
Any last questions before we wrap up?
you said in your campaign after all the analysis and you bring it live to market and then you quote unquote let it run, right? So obviously then data starts immediately.
Yes.
So how long do you think you quote unquote let it run?
We make changes immediately.
Okay.
So the traditional ways, you let it run, you get
Quarter,
reports a
what's
month.
couple quarter,
Yeah,
yeah.
quarter, like a couple months, and then you make decisions off that. We started making decisions. And some of it was like, oh shoot, like we need to make that change like now. So there's some of those things that happen, but then there's also like, that's really interesting. Like how do we decision off that? But you get data immediately. So you should start making, in my opinion, you should start making decisions.
Have you ever ignored the data
Yeah.
and stayed with it anyway?
Yes.
Was that a good decision or a bad
Why are you
decision?
unearthing all these like,
I'm just,
these, like
come on, man, we gotta,
Yeah, look, I think we're all navigating this and learning as we go. So I think as we started this, there's decisions we probably should have made faster that we learned the hard way from. So part of it's making the mistakes and then learning from it, and then that's a whole.
yeah, because we see, and even in the conversations with you guys and others, the idea of, lies, damn lies, and statistics. And so, like, how you can take the data and how you interpret the data is still relevant. And so I was just wondering, it was a question, whether you'd ever done that. And I'm sure all of us have at certain times kind of done that, but how we use that, I think that's maybe the big question, right?
Yeah.
Is how we get the value out of it without
Right.
getting the rest. But anyway, with that, Jacob, thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you. Good.